So we're going to keep rolling here with to try to build on a very, very great conference so far. Excellent first panel. Kurt's remarks, fantastic. Really excellent keynotes by the new Korea Foundation president. So we're going to try to live up to the high bar that's already been set here this morning as we roll into the afternoon. We've got really an excellent and timely panel on the U.S. ROK trade deal. And we also will hope to get into the overall trading relationship as well, commercial, critical technologies, all of that. And we've got an all-star panel to represent a wide range of views, from commercial practitioners, former government officials, academics, you name it, we've got it. It's here for you at this conference here today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists quickly. Please do take a look at their full bios. They're on your tables. They are really impressive folks. I'm going to try to do justice to their bios here. But first, I'm going to go this way on the panel. Kim Heungchong, correct? Did I get it?
Correct.
Pardon me. No more audio. All right. Pronunciation's too hard. Currently at Asan, former president of the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, widely published in academia, 300 plus articles. I think you and Victor are in an arms race there to get up to that number. And a member of the Foreign Affairs Security Unification Advisory Council and the National Economic Council, separate councils to the Democratic Party of Korea. Welcome to the panel. Next, Kelly Ann Shaw, former Deputy Assistant to the President for International Economic Affairs and Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. You were also, I think, the Sherpa at some of the big multilateral gatherings. It's an incredibly important job for those of you who don't follow the machinations of the White House closely, but incredibly important job. Partner at Aiken, Trade Counsel on the Ways and Means Committee, USTR experience, and CSIS as a senior advisor as well. Welcome, Kelly. All right, moving on to Kim Seungho. He's a professor currently at Hallym University, former Deputy Trade Minister for Legal and Multilateral Affairs, career diplomat, really interesting background in the service there. He was ambassador to Iran, consul general in Shanghai, also represented the Korean government at OECD, the WTO, and the European Union. He too is well published. Welcome to the panel. And last but certainly not least, Rob Porter. He is the Chief Global Affairs Officer at Coupang, which is a Seattle-based company, not a Korean-based company. There's often confusion on that. He is former White House Staff Secretary. That too is I would say, an undervalued or underrated job, incredibly important. He had the rank of assistant to the president, which everybody does know there's only a few of those in each administration. That is a huge job, where he was coordinating policy, kind of a de facto chief of staff, deputy chief of staff for policy. Also had the honor of working on the Hill with some of the best senators that we've seen on the Republican side. Orrin Hatch, Rob Portman, my home state senator, and Mike Lee, of course. Well, Rob, welcome to the panel. All right, let's dig in. We're going to try to cover a few issues, as I've talked about, but mainly 5 big chunks to try to get through. The deal itself, we've got implications on Chorus FTA, commercial irritants or issues in the relationship, the critical technology cooperation, and of course, multilateral issues that stem from this as well. But let me just dive in, and we're going to ask our panelists to broad brushstrokes on the deal, on the relationship, just to kick it off with almost kind of a quasi-opening statement. But maybe to you, Heungchong, first. Does the bilateral trade relationship, to the point of this panel, does it bring a sustainable equilibrium to the relationship? Does the agreement bring a sustainable equilibrium for the next few years? Do you see tariffs stopping? Do you see more negotiations unfolding? How do you see this relationship in terms of the overall U.S. ROK economic relationship?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for your kind introduction. And first of all, I'd like to emphasize that my speech is not representing, I do not represent my institutions that that are now affiliating. And then your questions about the bilateral economic relations, how to stabilize. And then my, my answer is not necessarily. When I look at the agreements reached in July and followed by additional understandings on October 29th, and also the fact sheet released in November 14, I'm reminded of something like the never-ending treadmill I'm running, okay? Or about to borrow the Western expressions, an endless hamster wheel. The negotiation never truly ends, and the grounds keep shifting. There are several reasons why. And the first, the Trump administration tends to move the goalpost continuously. The list of demands evolved, like the US dollar, 350 billions in local investment, 25% of reciprocal tariff, a flexible list of the sector-specific tariff items, and also even unexpected incidents such as the arrest and the detention in Georgia. New issues surface constantly, and even senior officials contract each other. So a statement made today may be reversed tomorrow. It's reasonable to expect this pattern to continue. And second, the scope of sector-specific tariffs keep expanding. Originally, we say that the steel, aluminum, automobile and exports, and the pharmaceutical, semiconductors were mentioned. Later, copper, furniture, blah, blah, were added. Because these industries largely overlap with the strategic sectors the United States aims to reshow, further expansion is entirely plausible. In fact, the tariff burden on Korean exporters will much exceed the nominal 15% of the reciprocal tariff. Already more than half of the Korea's export to the U.S. fall under sector-specific tariffs. So we just reached the agreement of the 15% of reciprocal tariffs, but that is just less than half of the Korea's export to the United States. So we will, we trade deal has been decided, but has not been decided because of the larger portion of the sector-specific tariff rate. From the perspectives of many foreign partners, therefore, the United States negotiation process now resembles the perpetual rolling negotiations rather than a one-time settlement. The term shift, demands are added, and sectoral coverage expands. The fundamental question is whether, if such a fluid and constantly evolving system can ever serve as a basis for stability in bilateral economic relations. Let me stop here.
Okay, excellent. Let me just ask you one follow-up then. Given that you've got this instability, given that you've got uncertainty, do you see possibilities for, as it says in the title, a win-win outcome here?
Oh, win-win outcome. Yeah, I think that is the last terms that I can expect. From the trade deals between the United States and Korea this year, because officially, officially or unofficially, from the American part, I heard that this is not the deal of the win-win system. Because some like-minded countries, our friends like Japan, Korea, has been continuously ripping off the America. So now it's time for the United States payback. So there was the official stance of the American, the Trump administration's stance on this trade deal. So this means that there is no possibility of the win-win. There is from the American side. Of course, the Korean side, we are trying to do best to achieve the kind of the win-win outcomes. But I don't think that is the original aims that from our Korean American partners are expecting.
Okay, outstanding. Off to a great start. Ms. Shaw, your comments on the overarching deal, anything you want to add to the first intervention? The floor is yours.
Sure, and thanks so much. And I'm still trying to get over the fact that you wrote 300 articles. I can barely get enough emails out during the day, so quite impressive. Look, I guess if I were to sum it up in one word as a former U.S. negotiator, I'd call the deal great. Like, I do think that, where you stand is where you sit from some perspectives. And I spent a decade negotiating for the United States. And during the first Trump administration, we renegotiated the KORUS agreement. We made changes to rules of origin. We addressed some steel issues, automotive issues, and a few things. But what it didn't do is really fundamentally fix the relationship and the asymmetries between the relationship. And you can agree with this premise or not, but the primary litmus that the administration is using to evaluate the success of a deal is the trade deficit, which is now at something like $66 billion for trade and goods. It's gotten significantly worse, frankly, since that renegotiated KORUS outcome. And so, this isn't just an exercise happening in a vacuum, of course. It's not just the United States and Korea who are negotiating. It's the United States negotiating with every single trading partner in the world at the same time. So this is a very, very unique moment in history and certainly the most profound shift in global trade policy in my lifetime. But that said, I think the administration has sort of teed up this choose your own adventure for different trading partners. And so for some trading partners, they have done significant efforts to reduce both tariff and non-tariff barriers. So this would be like the Indonesia model, where most of that agreement is very detailed commitments on specific trade issues. Cambodia and Malaysia took a similar approach. Then you have what I call the Japan model, which is effectively buying your way out. So that's that $550 billion investment mechanism where Japan made very few concessions on traditional trade issues. But in order to correct the balance, to invest in strategic sectors and to do other things to try to rebalance the trade deficit, they're sort of like buying their way into a lower tariff rate. And then Korea and the EU, I sort of take as a bit of a hybrid of both. And so they've both made more traditional trade commitments. And those, again, from the perspective of a washed up former trade negotiator, are pretty incredible in terms of the things that U.S. industry has found very frustrating in terms of access to the market. So, the top three issues have to do with automotive, agriculture, and then you get into the digital issues, including the Online Platform Act and other irritants that are really strong priorities for the administration and domestic industry. And then you also have this fund. So this $150 billion fund, $200 billion fund that is supposed to be paid out at $20 billion for 10 years. And, we don't know a lot about how that's going to operate. We've got text. We can read the text. But until we actually see some of these investments go through, that's where the rubber's going to meet the road on this. But to your point about, can this be a win-win? That's where I actually see a lot of opportunities for Korean industry to take advantage of some of the strong policies and emphasis in strategic sectors where, frankly, Korean companies really shine globally. Like, they are market leading in terms of some of the innovations and investments they're making. So I do see some real opportunity there, and then commitments on shipbuilding and others. What has the U.S. given up? I think a little bit of leverage on the 232 tariffs. One view of it is they sort of, applied these tariffs or they have tariffs in queue and they're basically negotiating back from that. So it's not like we've seen a lot of U.S. tariff rates come down. But for certain products we do, like on agricultural and food products, these unavailable natural resources, on aircraft. And then what we haven't seen with Korea yet, but we have seen with other trading partners, is a willingness by the United States to cut their tariffs on generic pharmaceuticals. And so that could be sort of a phase two of what we see in terms of ongoing negotiations with Korea. But I do think that this is a really strong deal. I think it had a creative solution. The U.S. and Korea have a long trading relationship. They already had KORUS, so there wasn't a lot of tariff rates to cut on Korea's end. So I think this is a very interesting approach, and we'll see how it plays out in terms of implementation. But my assessment of the deal is it's strong.
Okay, let me ask one follow-up. Excellent comments. You noted in your intervention that you've got some resolution of longstanding commercial issues, non-tariff barriers. You've also got an attempt to address one of the biggest issues in the Trump administration economic policy mindset in the trade deficit. And then you've got the U.S. making some giving up some leverage on 232, right? How do you then square that circle with the earlier intervention that some of the bigger concerns are the instability going forward or a renegotiation going forward? What do you think this deal does on that forward-looking question?
Yeah, and I hear this a lot, not just from trading partners, but also from industry, right? Companies who are trying to make long-term investments. But I guess I would challenge the premise that certainty and stability is a good thing. And I guess my perspective is, like for so many of these trading relationships, we negotiate a deal and then we're locked in for years. And there is this theory of international trade that goes back to the 70s called the bicycle theory, that if you're not moving forward in terms of advancing new rules, you're actually moving backwards because trade and economic growth will continue. And then you have the challenge, like we do with the World Trade Organization, of trying to fit modern challenges into old rules that aren't fit for purpose. And so this concept that, frankly, we introduced in Trump 1.0 with this sunset review in USMCA, meaning the agreement will go away after a certain number of years unless the parties agree to renegotiate it. I think that's a positive model moving forward. And of course, you could argue that the Trump administration takes this to the extreme with giving, maybe not enough certainty. But I think it's gradations versus an approach. I think locking yourself into trade rules is actually going to be counterproductive for stakeholders on both sides of that relationship.
Okay, thank you so much. Seungho, over to you.
Sure.
First of all, any thoughts on the deal itself? Ramifications, your thoughts on this bucket of issues here?
Well, instead of mentioning trade, specific trade irritants or trade jargons, I would like to some brushwork how this trade deal will affect our alliance in general, and then how we maximize this opportunity to make our alliance even stronger. Well, by the nature, by the content of this outcome, and then the way it was conducted, most of Koreans, they feel the bitter mind. They are very much disappointed, even some frustrated and surprised. But what is done is cannot be done. So there is no point of repeating our resentment. But I think the bedrock of our alliance is not the geopolitical necessity or security anxiety. The very core element of our bilateral alliance is Korean people's affection toward the United States. Gratitude, indebtedness, thanks. We are liberated by united support from the Japanese rule. We fought together, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. So, we have some, bottomless affection to the United States, but the way we are treated in this deal is far from we expect. So that outcome of this tariff is, has already planted a small, tiny little seed of distrust in the bedrock of our alliance. So if certain conditions are met, this little seed can sprout, and if take root, that the hard granite can even, crack. So we have to be very careful, in order not to this seed will not, germinate. That is one point. And what we are going to do to escape such, unhappy result is that, every cloud has a silver lining. So what silver lining I find in this deal is that the time span. It is investment deal, so at least we have 10 more years. And then even that tiny little seed need time, whether to sprout or not. So we have a certain amount of time during which we can work together. So for Korean side, yes, Korea will live up to its promise, its commitment. that huge bill of huge amount of investment will be delivered to United States as scheduled. But there is another thing for United States can do and must do is I think what U.S. have received is not cash. What you received is a the check, personal check. So if my account there is not enough deposit, your check will be bounced. When I put it another way, from now on, Korea will be the goose that lays the golden eggs. As the fable goes, it is not smart way to grab the goose to cut the belly to take all the eggs at once. No. To get the golden eggs, U.S. has to feed well. So this goose need a good food to continue to lay the eggs. So as much as the goose need good food, Korea need good market to earn money because Korea is not a printing money country. You can perform a magic to turn paper and ink into U.S. dollar, but Korea has no such a magic wand. In order to invest that promised money into U.S. market, the Koreans must earn it from the foreign market. There is only two markets left where we can earn such great money. One is United States. The other one is China. In the U.S. States, the more we sell our product to United States and the more we earn U.S. money here, and then the more we can invest. So such, the surplus, trade surplus for Korean side, trade deficit for your side, surplus investment and more surplus. That kind of virtuous cycle shall rotating here. So United States help Korea to export more in this market. How? Lower the tariff. Eventually, returning to the Korea-U.S. FTA, with which we enjoy the zero tariff. Another market is China. Yes, the more the United States understand or sometimes even facilitate the Korea to export more to Chinese market. That does not undermine U.S. supremacy in that the region. On the contrary, the more Korean the product will be sold in Chinese market, the more the money earned by Korea, and then invested into U.S. states. That is some kind of the money transition from China to U.S. via Korea. It is Korea can serve a U.S. straw that tapped into the Chinese vault. So you can sit back and relax, just sipping the Chinese liquid. So in that regard, I think you have to understand and then sometimes support Korea's export expansion to Chinese market. All these not only good for Korea, but also it will help Korea to live up to our investment commitment.
And so just to follow up, so you outlined what it takes to facilitate more exports to the U.S., lower tariffs. I would argue predictability is embedded in your comments as well. What more can the U.S. do to help Korea export to a Chinese market? Is that stability in the overall relationship between Washington and Beijing?
Simple, do not disturb. We do not request some kind of active role of United States. No, just do nothing. Please.
I'm
understand.
very good at doing nothing. Let me tell you. So
Please do nothing, and then believe Korea. Do not doubt in Korea's. Do not doubt in Korea's commitment. The 70 years long alliance. So we can manage the alliance while, we can, wisely managing our bilateral relations, mostly, economic relations with China.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Great stuff there. Rob, over to you. You've been waiting patiently. We're saving our cleanup hitter for last here. Floor is yours. Anything on these previous intervention or your own comments?
Sure. Thanks very much. First off, thanks to CSIS for hosting this conference and this great panel, and especially to Victor Cha for organizing this. Victor is a great mentor and advisor to many of us privately, but also has really emerged as I think, an indispensable public intellectual in academia, in the media, but certainly from his perch here at CSIS in helping all of us understand the dynamics of the U.S. ROK relationship, what's at stake, and how best to move forward. So always happy to participate in anything that Victor's associated with. My experience in government is a little bit different than Kellyanne's and some of the other panelists, and not having been a negotiator dealing with sort of the technical details and mechanics of particular trade frameworks, but in helping to coordinate and formulate trade policy, thinking about the key priorities and objectives, some of the dynamics between various economies, and some of the ways in which deals could be struck, priorities can be advanced, and things can come out as mutually beneficial or advantageous. And so that's sort of the lens through which I approach looking at this deal. And in answering what I think is sort of the overarching question of this panel is this a durable trade agreement, a durable deal between the U.S. and ROK? And I think, perhaps in contrast to some of the other panelists, I very much think that it is, and that there's good reason to think that it will be durable and really marks a new era in the overall U.S. ROK, not only economic relationship, but alliance overall. And I'd like to share what I think are three good reasons to think that that's the case. The first relates to the context and the content of the agreement itself. So this is an agreement that was really prioritized by both sides. Over the course of the weeks and months when the trade negotiations were hot and heavy, and a lot of different countries, including some large countries with big economies, were trying to get in to see the U.S., to see negotiators at USTR, Commerce otherwise. South Korea, along with a handful of others like the UK, the EU, Japan, were prioritized, and others were put in the back of the line. This was something that was given priority and preeminence from the U.S. side. And I think it's also clear that for Korea, especially the new Lee Jae-myung administration, this was a first big test on the global stage, identified the U.S. as an indispensable leading economic and trade partner, and really gave a lot of priority to this. So first, priority. Second, is this was really a hard-won agreement. The negotiations on this were not quick or easy. One of the reasons why it wasn't announced in its various iterations even earlier than it was because these were negotiations with successive rounds at the staff, local, technical level, at the ministerial level, and even including two substantive meetings between President Trump and President Lee in Washington and in Korea, discussing the substance. When it's a hard-won agreement, this is one where both sides thought very carefully about their respective priorities, about their strategies, about what was most important, and they also understood what were the priorities and the objectives of the other side. And I think that the joint fact sheet reflects that. And so when you have negotiations that are hard-won in that respect, they tend to be more durable. The final, just sort of in this first category of context and substance, is that this is a comprehensive deal. Not in the sense of details, it's only 3.5 pages long, but this includes investments, it includes trade, it includes security, a lot of very important things for both sides. And when it's a comprehensive deal that includes a lot of key objectives and priorities, those tend to be the things where neither side is going to risk letting one small area in one of those pillars upset the apple cart and risk all of the hard-won gains overall. So that's the first. The second thing is this agreement is really the basis and I think the embodiment of what, at least in the initial stages, is a very strong relationship between President Trump and President Lee. Just by virtue of the context, Lee Jae-myung was in a very difficult situation when he came into power in the midstream of this, where with no transition period, where the reciprocal tariffs were already announced, where some of the preliminary negotiations had already been taking place with the prior or with the provisional government, and he had a very short window in which to engage. And so in the visit to the White House, in the state visit in Gyeongju, it really was the substance of this deal. Its investment side, its trade side, its security side, that was part of the discussion. And I think that both President Lee and President Trump, over the course of this, saw each other as tough negotiators who were very committed to ensuring the priorities of their respective countries, came to appreciate and respect each other. And it's really the success of this agreement, of being able to find common ground, of being able to find areas of mutual agreement and mutual benefit, that is really the source and the embodiment of that strong relationship. And I don't think either side wants to risk what this deal in any way being unraveling or coming into question in the future would mean for the personal relationship between those leaders and the relationship of those two countries. Third and finally, because I know Mark will want to move on with additional questions, but third and finally, this agreement does not have the hallmarks that many of the other trade agreements that the Trump administration has negotiated, where effectively it's a temporary truce to dial down tariffs and have some sort of non-status quo trade relationship moving forward. If you think about most of the other countries that we're negotiating, they're in the position of being an exporter to the U.S., often with a trade deficit that they're seeking to find ways, given the tariffs that President Trump implemented, they're seeking to find ways to compensate, essentially, to make concessions and to compensate for that trade deficit. There's elements of that with Korea as well. But you look at the joint fact sheet, and the way in which it reads is less in that frame and more in the frame of not just a security alliance, but an industrial alliance in terms of the investment provisions and a technology alliance in terms of AI and other technology and some of the digital trade provisions. And it's because these two countries need, and I think could really benefit mutually from each other. Right, you have the U.S. that very much wants to secure supply chains, that wants to reinvigorate its domestic industrial base, wants to be a leader in AI. And you have South Korea that in shipbuilding, in advanced manufacturing, and logistics, in batteries, has a lot of the leadership that the U.S. wants and needs. When it comes to technology and AI development, you've got a really nice synergy where on the Korea side, in terms of AI and technological hardware, semiconductors, chips, is a real leader. The U.S. side, when it comes to AI software and various sort of AI models, there could be nice synergies. And you look at the joint fact sheet, and I see this really as the embodiment of a new era in the alliance that's not just security-based and not just based on sort of an important trade or economic relationship, but a new industrial and technology alliance.
All right, outstanding, Rob. Let me come back with one follow-up. You outlined the strategic case for this very, very artfully. Take us to your current role in more of an operational sense, right? What does this mean for a company like Coupang? What does this mean for other companies that are doing business between the two countries? How do you see this playing out at an operational level? Double click on your strategic comments, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. I think for a whole range of companies that do business on both sides of the Pacific, this helps provide a policy framework for what I think a lot of industry, what industry is already trying to do and wants to do more of, which is have those commercial relationships, the collaboration, and be able to invest in research and development projects, being able to innovate on both sides, being able to increase the trade and investment flows in ways that are very much mutually advantageous. And I think this provides the policy framework that will enable a lot of Korean companies, U.S. companies, global companies that do business in both areas to be able to do it more effectively and more transparently.
So you're a little less worried than Heungchong on the forward-looking, not instability, but I guess you would say constant rolling negotiation impacting business. Or it sounds like you're a little less worried about that than perhaps over here.
Well, look, I think we all just have to recognize that we're in a different era when it comes to trade negotiations, right? It used to be you'd have these multilateral institutions, or you would have years and years of detailed negotiations, renegotiations, some of which Kellyanne participated in, that would involve hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of detailed texts and chapters and annexes with great specificity. That would then get locked in, and you would turn to some sort of multilateral institution like the WTO to help enforce it, et cetera. That's no longer the world in which we live. And so are there going to be rolling discussions? Of course, absolutely. You know, even with the months of negotiations that have taken place, there's 3.5 pages of text. You know, the MOU on investments that, you know, it's massive in terms of its scope and scale, and the size of the investments is 5 pages. There's still a lot of details that are going to need to be worked out. There's still a lot of examples and specifics that will have to be fleshed out. But I think that the deal provides a very stable set of parameters, of principles, and of priorities that can be built on with those ongoing and continuing discussions.
Okay, outstanding. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to come to Kellyanne, and then I'm going to come to Seungho. I want to talk about a key piece of this deal, which is the investment mechanism, right? We've got this pretty interesting piece here, what, $350 billion, $150 in shipbuilding, $250 billion other, 20 of that per annum, right? So pretty interesting stuff, and a mechanism being constructed, I guess, for lack of a better term, to regulate, adjudicate, implement all of this. How is this going to work? What are your thoughts? Any advice to give also, in addition to analytic insights of what might be going on? The floor is yours.
Yeah, great questions. And I've gotten quite a few questions, frankly, from industry, who's interested in taking advantage both of the Korea Fund as well as the Japan Fund. And the truth is, like, as I said at the outset, we have words on a piece of paper that outline a process, but we won't know exactly how it works until we see a few of these projects go through the system. But effectively, it would be some sort of committee process to come up with proposed projects in strategic sectors. And it would be proposed by the Secretary of Commerce to the President, who then will say yes or no and pitch it over to the government of Korea to say yes or no. And if the government of Korea decides they don't want to help fund or finance or get involved with this particular project, the penalty could potentially be a reimposition of tariffs, right? So you see this on the piece of paper and you think this seems very uneven-handed. But in reality, I actually think this is going to work a lot more smoothly, in part because you do have a very strong interest in the United States in making this work. I don't think that anybody has an interest in trying to stick it to either Korea or Japan for the main fact that these are two of our most significant trading partners and allies. And particularly in the Korean case, where, again, Korean companies are so innovative. I think that the Korean economy just has so much to offer the United States in terms of some of these strategic priorities and sectors that I actually see a lot of opportunity for Korean companies to also potentially take advantage of this funding by building projects in the United States. It's not just open to U.S. companies. And frankly, I've even heard from companies who are headquartered in third parties who aren't part of any of these agreements ask if they could be eligible for this funding as well. So you could see things like equity stakes. You could see sort of novel financing mechanisms that we just traditionally haven't seen before that could provide a real opportunity in this new modern and advanced economy. So we'll have to see, sort of the long way of saying we won't know until we see a few of these go through. But my guess is the first few projects will be of both political, cultural, economic significance to both the United States and Korea, because that's really the only way to make this work.
All right, outstanding. Seungho, let me come to you. Similar question. In your opening intervention, you gave outlined a cautionary tale about how this went down politically in Korea. Number one. Number two, you talked about some seeds of doubt being planted and being careful not to sow those seeds of doubt. Third thing you talked about is also not killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. And finally, the need for a robust North American market going forward. In the implementation of this fund, which is at the core of this agreement, what should the U.S. do to make sure it navigates the wickets that you so artfully outlined in your opening intervention?
Well, the common sense in the business world is that if you invest your money, you have observed, it bears a full risk, and then also, if that investment will succeed, it is you to take all the money. Winner takes all. So, investor, those someone who actually fold his asset into the field. He has full control. But the signed document, the so-called MOU document of investment, it is quite interesting. It is U.S. To have full discretion where to invest, and the U.S. bears no liability at all if the investment will fail. So there's one movie, 30 years ago, do you know Danny DeVito, the talented, He starred in a movie, the name is called Other People's Money. In that movie, he's a ruthless, greedy, corporate liquidator. He buy corporate and cut it to pieces and sell. After almost intimidating a diligent, faithful, old, from Vermont or Maine, investors, great money to his fund, after they sign a document that he declares with joy, I love money. I love money more than the things he can buy, but there is one thing I love more than money, that is other people's money. Because no risk. After all, it is not my money, his money. But if that the investor will succeed, then I will take the fruit. So, that mechanism is working on in the investment deal recently concluded between Korea and United States. As I told you, what is done cannot be undone. So we have to this investment deal into some kind of a catalyst to make our alliance more strong. That is, Rob correctly mentioned, Kelly correctly mentioned, where to invest this money. The first, United States, even though United States has a full discretion where to invest, but please, accept Korea's at least consent. And then, please allow Korea's management engagement to monitor how this money is spent. And then, those strategic industries or those things, AI, strip building also, that is some kind of biscuit to allure boys and the dogs into the trap. That strategy industries, written in our document is an illustrative list, not a exhaustive list. Including those sectors, the final decision where to invest will be exercised by the United States. That is the very killing sentence. Please do not exercise that, do not wage that power at your whim. Please, consult Korea in detail and then, try to accept Korea's, advice.
And so your forward-looking advice here is, if I can sum it up a bit, just in the implementation, one, I think I'm going to draw out a little bit. Let business people, especially on the Korean side, make business decisions, number one. Number two, as you're going through this process, consult and consent with Korea. And number three, work together to maximize returns, right?
Sure.
Fair. And that could unlock the Rob and Kelly promise that they see and move forward. Okay, so we've got a little bit of half full. Rob, you want to come in?
Yeah, can I make maybe one comment just about it,
Yeah.
the discussion on investment provisions? So, I think you can think about this very narrowly, the investment pillar, as, okay, who's going to be making the decisions, who's bearing the risk, what's the likely rate of return, and whose balance sheet is it going to go. And those are not unimportant, but I think some of the dire warnings and predictions are unlikely to be borne out. But I think there's a different and I would say much more important way of thinking about this that's actually reflected in the text, which I brought. And so, there's no investment pillar. Even the way in which it's described in the joint statement is rebuilding and expanding critical industries. And it's not talking about investments primarily in terms of ROI and that. It's specifies shipbuilding, energy, semiconductors, critical minerals, AI. The way in which the investment provisions are structured, the way in which the industries are specified, the broader context of the objectives that it's seeking to achieve is all part of a joint industrial policy that I think, as I mentioned earlier, really outlines sort of a broader industrial alliance that's really about a lot more than sort of that narrow analysis of investments, gains or losses.
It's a fair point. It's an interesting friction point in that you're going big, talking about some of the bigger concepts. On the other hand, you've got to make sure that the business case closes, that it makes economic sense on the Korean side for the folks to invest themselves. So that's a really interesting point of implementation. And I guess I'll just leave it to one of my former bosses who was a British High Commissioner. We're going to have to watch that space, right? I think it's a really interesting space to watch. That's why I'm trying to get at it and really appreciate the two-finger intervention there, Rob. Excellent. Let me come back here to Heungchong, because one of the things Rob is mentioning about this technology alliance is to try to get at a manufacturing renaissance, so to speak, right? I think that's the word we used in the program here today. That seems to be one of the goals of the Trump administration, to rebuild and restore some of this manufacturing prowess that the U.S. once had, or has declined over the years. How do you see that? Can this lead to manufacturing, I guess, a manufacturing renaissance here in the U.S.? And interestingly enough, how does it impact on the Korean side, where the manufacturing base is also an issue?
I'm more cautious about the average issues, including this trade deal. And first of all, just some brief mentions about the investment. And there are a lot of risk actually remains in the investment, and I will talk about the manufacturing renaissance. But the U.S. Investment Committee ultimately make decisions, So these committees may choose the project with a long payback period and high uncertainty, of course, because this is not my money, okay? And so it's the kinds of investment that struggle to attract the private capital in the United States does require public funds. So given this kind of the things that yes, still I'm very cautious about what the investment committee will decide on where and how much. And so that's the reason why we are not talking about the consulting committee and something like the how to intervene this decision making from the Korean perspective, which is the money want to stick to the kind of the principle of the money talks, but money doesn't talk. Okay, in these cases. So this is the still we are now we have a concern. And the next time talking about the manufacturer renaissance, I would like to point out 3 points. The first one is about the manufacturing renaissance in the United States. Yes, that could be successful, but we need to think about these aspects. industries relocating to the United States, face a high labor cost and even productivity across regions. So many labor-intensive tasks are likely to be replaced not by the human workers, but by embedded systems involving AI and humanoid robotics in the United States when the reshoring. So manufacturing may revive, but the job creation may fall far short of the White House's expectation. So we need to think about this kind of aspect as well. The second thing is the firms investing in developing countries. We are not talking about the developed countries like the United States, but take an example of the developing countries. Often face the weak infrastructure, like roads, ports, water, electricity, something like that, and must build their own dedicated industrial complexes. Suppose that the case of the Bangladesh Chittagong area, suppose that the case of the Borneo, Kalimantan areas. Of course, the United States is not a developed country, of course, but infrastructure quality varies dramatically by states. Georgia became attractive, precisely because its infrastructure was strong relative to other locations. If federal and the state governments fail to address the infrastructure gaps, the peer of the United States manufacturing investment may gradually erode. And I sincerely hope that the United States government doesn't shift these burdens on to Korean investors. That would undermine the very goal that the Trump administration is trying to achieve. And the last one, even if final goods manufacturing is relocated to the United States, the upstream supply chains, upstream areas like raw materials, components, and intermediate goods remains heavily dependent on China. That's a fact. For example, United States automotive imports from China reaches around $15 billion in 2018, accounting for almost 13% of all U.S. automobile imports. And studies shows that the largest share of electronics, ICT, and battery-related components entering U.S. manufacturing rely on Chinese upstream suppliers. Indiscriminate reshoring, in such a case, may therefore deepen U.S. manufacturers' dependence on China for critical inputs. So granting the Beijing greater leverage, including the ability to disrupt U.S.-based production through export control on strategic materials. For this reason, the reshoring of manufacturing in the United States must proceed strategically. I do not argue that reshoring is totally a failure or is impossible. Yes, we can do, but we need to take this project very strategically, cautiously, and at different speeds depending on the product and its supply chain structure. Okay, let me stop here.
All right, excellent, outstanding. Kellyanne, can I come to you? Your comments on the potential manufacturing impacts, quite interested in. The other point that I'd love to get to is slightly different topic, but on some of these commercial issues that have been, autos, ag. My understanding is there's a joint committee. The Course Joint Committee is going to be charged with implementing an action plan on to promote reciprocal trade, right? You've got a lot of experience in trade negotiations from the Hill, USTR, in the administration. How do you see that piece of the implementation unfolding as well? So just basically, you've got two pieces of implementation going on. One, trying to figure out how this investment committee works, potentially helping manufacturing. And then the other piece, slightly different, moving into a new topic, these commercial issues to balance that all out. The floor is yours.
Yeah, no, great questions. And this is why I often joke, like those, fancy job titles that we used to have. They come with a medium amount of money because of the complex issues you have to balance. Look, I think that there's no magic wand that any president can wave and bring back domestic manufacturing. And it's just as much a national security imperative the fact that we are over-reliant on a potential adversary for critical inputs that we need, and frankly, sometimes, in some cases, over-reliant on allies. Like you take COVID, where the whole world erected export barriers, even our best friends, on things that we needed for Americans' health and well-being. There are just some things we need to produce here. So that is a national security challenge. It's also a democracy challenge. It's part of the reason why Trump won the election in 2016, why he won again in 2024. It's this idea of having a large percentage of the American population who feels divorced from the economic policies of the political elite, which is why the U.S. has walked away from this. We're just going to have low tariffs with our allies and higher tariffs with others. We just need to tariff everyone because we have a population that will not support democratically those free trade policies of the past. And so this is sort of a sea change in a lot of different ways. What that means for manufacturing is, of course, the administration's very focused on this sector of the economy. Frankly, they don't even talk about services half the time, except for very discrete issues. But that's because manufacturing is viewed as overlooked for so many decades. Trade policy is a huge part of that. And it's part of what they're trying to negotiate with trading partners like South Korea, like Japan, like the EU and others, and trying to get strategic sectors to invest, to build, to do creative types of financing and loan guarantees and everything else to try to do it. But there's a lot of work that needs to happen domestically too. My friend on my right's point about domestic infrastructure, having roads, having jobs, having worker training, and all of those things. So all of this needs to happen at the same time. There's no magic wand. All the administration or any administration can do is just take one step forward and see how it goes. So that's sort of my view on the manufacturing piece. I think they're trying to get there, and they're aware that it's not just a one-size-fits-all problem. To the point about the commercial relationship and the implementation of this trade deal. So I do think that having a committee structure set up to kind of evaluate how it's going, that's the model we have in most of our free trade agreements. So even in the KORUS agreement, there was a KORUS committee where you had representatives on both sides talking about and consulting on a regular basis about different aspects of the agreement. So this is kind of a normal feature, and I think healthy. It's good to have experts on both sides talking with some regularity and frequency. But what the administration is going to be watching for, and Korea will have its own lists of things that they'll be watching for, but from the U.S. perspective, it will be, what does Korea do in terms of agriculture? What does Korea do in terms of automotive, and what do they do in terms of these digital provisions? Because those, again, are the highest priorities. There are other provisions in there about IP and environment and labor, but that's really what the administration is going to be watching for as to whether or not this agreement has been successful, which is sort of a separate track from the investment piece of it. But we won't know until we start working our way through the agreement.
All right, outstanding. And let me come back, Seungho, to you. And this dovetails a little bit. We're talking about a KORUS joint committee, right? Mm-hmm. Rob, Kelly, Ann have made the point that also we're sort of past KORUS FTA, we're sort of past these big multilateral deals, right, that are pretty rigid. But the Korean side still very much likes KORUS FTA, and I would argue there are others in the U.S. who very much like KORUS FTA as a basis of predictability, stability, a bedrock of the bilateral economic relationship. How do you square that circle? How do you think about KORUS FTA, the importance of it in an era, an environment of what Peter Harrell calls a contract-based trade policy on top of the KORUS FTA?
Well, those are trade-depending issues, trade irritants, if you may call it. That has been my major, the work during the career. So most trade diplomats, they are working on to minimize the trade irritants, and the small trade dependings will not grow further, not snowball to the level of require political attention. So that has been the usual, the trade diplomat's job. But from now on, I think, as far as Korea is concerned, vis-a-vis United States, these trade issues will become, I think, the back burner issues. In front burner, we have much more, imminent and hot issues. Dissolving trade irritants is a good thing. Arranging, chairs, lines and columns, that's very good, the work. But problem is that, the Titanic is sinking now. Arranging deck chair while Titanic is sinking, what's the point of it? Korea's FTA, which requires both sides apply 0% tariff, but Korea's continue to apply 0% for U.S. goods. The United States still, apply 15%. And then I mentioned at my earlier intervention that we are disappointed the way it was conducted by the United States. That wasn't Korea's FTA. If United States really need, industrial renaissance or, improvement of strategic economies, industries, and then for that, if they need money, well, if they come to us and straightforward what they need, and then Korea, U.S., as the two countries has always been done, we can talk, cooperate, collaborate to find a mutual beneficial solution. But instead of this, the southern United States take Korea's FTA as a hostage, and then tell Korea, if your Korea's FTA child back, you have to pay. What kind of diplomacy is this? I never witnessed during my 4-decade diplomacy the work this kind of activity. How could it be done at the level of this great power? So that is the problem which circle Korea's FTA. So we have to make sure that this Korea's FTA ship will float again, and then how to arrange deck chairs. I think that will be the back burner issue.
Okay, very interesting. A little bit of divergence here in the future, right, outlook between the American and Korean side, but interesting. That's why they, to Kellyanne's point, they pay former U.S. officials a tiny salary to go and negotiate these deals. I'm joking. So let's wrap up here. We got about 8 minutes left. I want final thoughts from the panel here. Lessons learned. How do we square the circle? What's the vision going forward? I'm going to go just left to right here across the row.
Okay, thank you. And my final words is about I am still cautious and pessimistic, but I believe the United States, possesses extraordinary potential. Everybody knows and agree, economic dynamism, and technological leadership, and also the unmatched innovation ecosystem. So for the Korean, I think the economy, also. It's very important for the Korea to more integrate to the American ecosystem and economic system, which can lead to the kind of prosperous future. So the economic alliance between our two countries strengthens. These assets can be fully realized to the benefit of the both nations over the longer run. So we are talking about the Korea's FTA, and then Korea really want to stick the Korea's FTA, the benefits of the Korea's FTA. So I hope that the American administration, the Trump administration, and then later, and try to find out again the importance and the value of this kind of institutional setup regarding the trade deals. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Hallym.
Yeah, I think that we are not even a month out from that final fact sheet. So November 13th is when Korea and the United States posted the final outcome of the negotiations. And just this morning, we had the U.S. implementing parts of that deal in terms of the tariff cuts. So I do think it's too soon to tell exactly how this goes. I'm just an eternal optimist. I think the relationship is going to go very well. I completely understand the sentiment that we didn't have 15% tariffs and now we do, and so what did Korea get for it? But that's why I started my remarks with taking a step back and just appreciating the context, which is this is the approach the United States has taken with every single country on earth. It is not a referendum on the state of the relationship. whether or not a country is a national security ally, an important economic partner or not, even countries with whom the United States has a trade surplus. The U.S. has at least 10% tariffs and then higher sectoral tariffs as well. So this is just a new approach in terms of what U.S. democracy will support. It supports a policy and a trade policy that has a ring of tariffs around our economy to try to rebalance the terms of global trade. And that is where not only this president is going to go, but likely the next and the one thereafter. I think we're just in a different swing of history. But that said, I think there's a ton of opportunity. I look forward to seeing how this relationship evolves. Korea is one of America's top trading partners. And now we sort of got over a bit of a rough negotiation. I think we landed in a really good spot. And I'm optimistic for the future.
All right, outstanding.
Well, when it comes to trade in bilateral or bilateral relations, it is like the paddling underwater, under the surface, so that the swan gracefully float. Well, it is my first time to be invited this honorable institution, and then that trade issue today is in the program is flanked with denuclearization and then the future of alliance. Wow. Honorably, there has never been. It is not the way trade has been treated in the bilateral session. It is not a good thing. Trade is such an honor to be flanked with two major political issues. It's not an honor. It's a danger. From now on, the sheer magnitude of the investment, the Korea's committed investment, is too large to be only managed by trade diplomat only. So definitely it will spill over to the higher level, political level. If it will spill over to that area, then political aspect, political decision comes in for the monetary matters. Money has its own logic, which is quite different from political or military logic. So I think in order to save our bilateral close relations, both in economy and the political areas, please let businessmen, please let trade diplomats deals with this investment. We have to work together. This investment will find its seat, its solution within investment area. We have to very much cautious, make this investment issue, this monetary issue cannot be, contaminated to political side.
All right, that's it. Rob, final word to you.
I'll answer real quick the previous question just about the future of CORUS agreement, and then try to wrap things up as well. So, CORUS, I think, will continue to be a foundational element and something that we look back to. But the reality is, even under the renegotiated CORUS, the trade imbalance between the U.S. and Korea was wide and expanding. And so in thinking about these negotiations, there are really three ways to try to close a trade deficit. One is through tariff levels. The second is through commercial considerations, purchases, et cetera. And then a third is through market access and non-tariff regulatory barriers. When it comes to the U.S. and Korea, because of course, tariff levels were already low. Maybe the U.S. tariffs will have some effect, but tariffs weren't really at play. Commercial considerations in this deal, there's some, there are a few. You've got 100 Boeing airplanes being purchased. You've got Korea buying some advanced weapons technology from the U.S. But purchases aren't really going to narrow that trade deficit. And so I think the focus that Kellyanne rightly put is on these non-tariff regulatory barriers, whether they're in agriculture and digital services and in automotives. That's really where the rubber's going to hit the road in terms of market access, in terms of rebalancing the trade relationship. But I also think that, amidst some of these, I think, well-placed concerns and cautions, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about what this trade framework means, not only for the economic relationship, but for the sort of the broader geopolitical dynamics of the U.S. ROK alliance. The investment sums are large. Some of the security commitments on the U.S. side are also quite significant. But I do think that when you look at this agreement in its totality, it really does mark a new chapter, which is what the prefatory language says in the U.S. ROK alliance, in ways where they can be not only national security allies, not only have an important trade and investment economic relationship, but really become partners and allies in critical industries, in technologies that will have economic ramifications, positive economic ramifications for both countries, but also very important ramifications geopolitically for both countries.
All right, outstanding. Let's wrap it up here. And I'm going to quickly say, I think we've got some important takeaways here. That trade, critically important going forward in this relationship in a way we haven't seen before. That there are some divergent views we've got to work through, but real opportunity, implementation will be key. And even Danny DeVito looms over the trade relationship. So we learned that. So without further ado, let's big round of applause for our panelists, Kim Heungchong, Kellyanne Shaw, Kim Seungho, and Rob Porter. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.